Are you an independent musician feeling overwhelmed by the endless act of juggling creativity, business, and self-care? You're not alone. That's why I created the Artist Mind Map. The Artist Mind Map is a free blueprint designed to help you get clear on the route you need to take to attain your career goals in alignment to your artistic values. This is not just another random PDF page for the forgotten corners of your hard disk. It's a timeless roadmap you can use for decades to come. Think of it as a go-to overview to consult. When you grab your free mind map, you get exclusive access to a masterclass that will take your career to the next level. I use the same methodologies and systems for my high-end paying clients and students. So why am I giving it to you for free? Simple. I want to build a community of artists who can count on each other for safe spaces. Music saved my life. I believe that you have all that it takes to be the artist you were meant to be, if you're willing to put in the work. And more importantly, understanding what that work is. And the Artist Mind Map was designed to help you do exactly that. So if this resonates with you, go to artistmindmap.com and download this resource. artistmindmap.com.
Is online education dead? Because there's a familiar narrative I see resurfacing in a lot of my circles, that online education has had its moment. People are tired of screens. People from some very interesting demographics, actually. Often younger circles, especially some of my friends in the early 20s, late 20s, who you'd think would be on top of all the technological trends, are actually taking a very different approach to their lives. More analog, visceral, immersive experiences in the daily routines, which I personally find very commendable, truth be told. But as an educator and artistpreneur, an artist who works internationally and has been doing so for a while, this seems like a very interesting topic for me to address, because here's the thing, is online education dead? Well, truth be told, a part of me can't help but tend to agree on some counts, because God knows I've had my share of wasted time and energy leaked into hollow promises by online gurus and ridiculously inflated promises. But the moving parts being conflated with each other and the conversation, the way they are, saddens me a little. I will say this, it does sadden me a little, because there's a baby in there holding on for dear life amidst it all, trying so hard not to get thrown out with the dirty bath water. And that is what I want to discuss today. Let's discuss. All right. How's it going, folks? I'm not quite sure how many of you noticed, but it's Thursday or Friday in some parts of the world, depending on where you are. And the reason I mentioned that, as if that's a big deal, is because my podcasts usually release on Tuesday. And this week's being one of the first where I missed my Tuesday release. And truth be told, I was slightly down about it. Made me feel like a bit of a failure, which is kind of crazy. But the mind does have a funny way of creeping up on you on some days, and it has been a couple of intense weeks, traveling between Europe and Asia. I'm still in India, visiting my mum, and next week I'm finally headed back to my winter base in Bangkok. So long story short, slightly behind schedule. That being said, I'm back to do a little rough and dirty recording again for you, right live on Zoom. I'm not sure if anyone's going to be coming in for the taping session, because it's on short notice, but it's going to be quite an interesting topic we're going to be addressing today. Online education, is it dead? An important chapter in my life was when distance finally didn't stand in the way. In the rhetoric going around right now, what's being framed as a failure by some is, in my opinion, a negligence to distinguish. Distinguish between median from memory, and I'm going to talk about this in a bit, quality from quantity, and access from preference. These distinctions matter, and they're not abstract ideas to me. One of my most formative teachers once declared me his first official disciple, and just to be clear, both of us are careful with language like that. And he did so not because we lived near each other, but because something in our interaction transcended the distance. That teacher, as many of you know, was Kenny Warner, author of Effortless Mastery, incredible jazz pianist, a legendary musician really, the GOAT, so to speak, in the world of jazz and jazz education. And our relationship unfolded online at a time when it might have still raised eyebrows. But distance never diluted the connection. If anything, it sharpened it. There's nowhere to hide behind presence. I still remember the first session I attended, which was a free webinar they were doing in the heat of the pandemic, together with my dear friend Vivian Ertz. There was a momentum, there was an atmosphere, and you couldn't hide from it. The work was the kind that either landed or didn't. And in my case, it definitely did, and it went deep. More recently, I graduated from Peter Crone's mastermind, who was on our podcast last week. FYI, there's a live replay which you can still carry, the raw unedited version. The official release is still on the cards. I'll announce that soon. But anyway, Peter Crone's mastermind and the effects that container has had on my professional life, my nervous system, and even my family are still unfolding. It's been so powerful that I don't even have the language for all of it. I'm still processing the ripple effects. What I do know is that in both cases, physical proximity wasn't the deciding factor. Commitment was. Readiness was. My work with my business mentor at the moment, George Kao, has been equally formative. His mentorship has been a game changer because of the precision, ethics, and long-term thinking he's mentoring me with. And George has been working this way long before any of this was fashionable, way before online businesses were a performance category rather than a discipline, which it is now in many opinions. And then there's this podcast, Tapasya Loading, where apart from the solo cast, which I do a lot more these days, I've also had the incredible honor of connecting and building a community with an incredible, I don't know how many times I keep using that word incredible, but it really has been an incredible roster of guests and artists who I've connected with via the internet. People who've shaped the trajectory of my artistic practice permanently. Taken together, this meant that some of the most important pillars of my life, creative mastery, inner work, ethical livelihood, are all shaped through sustained tutelage and engagement with people operating at an exceptionally high level. Not in spite of distance, but without distance being an obstacle. Many of these relationships simply wouldn't have been accessible to me through the channels that are often marketed as the real deal. Online work didn't dilute the seriousness of that. It made it possible. The pandemic is what actually changed the meaning of online. The pandemic. Here we are again. Almost 6 years down the line, still some stuff left to talk about. For many people, online communication isn't really neutral anymore. And I'll tell you why right now. Zoom didn't simply host conversations during the pandemic, or even Skype at the time, which doesn't exist anymore. It became the container these video communication tools became containers for uncertainty, blurred boundaries, and prolonged nervous system activation. Screens at the time, during lockdown, during the pandemic, weren't optional. They were compulsory, often the only way to communicate. So time collapsed, social cues thinned, work, intimacy, fatigue, and crises, all of these shared the same little rectangle in front of you. So now, when we say we're done with online learning, I think it's worth investigating where we're responding from. Is it the format, really? Or maybe the association our bodies retain with that period of time? Think about that one. Research on trauma and associative memory shows that environments repeatedly paired with stress can later trigger aversion, even when the original threat has passed. If you've ever heard of the book The Body Keeps Score from Van der Kolk, there's lots of references to that, worth checking out. In that sense, I find that much of the backlash against quote-unquote online education might actually be less pedagogical than physiological. Online education in this day and age carries a very realistic layer of PTSD, and it'd be a pity if we let that alone define the entire story. Let's talk about quantity versus quality. There's a real issue online right now. The sheer volume of content has collapsed signal-to-noise ratios. Anyone can teach. Everyone is teaching. Credentials are often implied rather than articulated. So many people out there don't even have the required qualifications to offer what they are. I keep thinking back in shock to this advertisement that popped up on my feed once, where you could get certified as a coach for 99 cents. Get certified as a coach for 99 cents. For fuck's sake. Meanwhile, there's a whole algorithm circus, which often will tend to reward familiarity and confidence faster than actual depth or even coherence. And now with AI, it's like a whole different league. Everybody knows or sounds like they know what they're talking about to the casual observer. So the levels of discernment now require entirely new leagues of effort. What's rarely acknowledged in the meantime is that, and this is, it's crazy how this whole thing's just being erased. Here's the thing, I'll repeat, what's rarely acknowledged in the meantime is that in-person education, the so-called real deal, has historically also had incredibly, there's that word again, has also had incredibly uneven quality, opaque hierarchies, charismatic charlatans, and poorly held rooms. So this isn't something that was started by online mediums. Fakeness has always existed. Physical proximity simply made it easier in some ways to gloss over many of those loopholes. And contrary to what many people think, it's not really an insurance for credibility at all. Quite the contrary. I'm going to get into this in a bit. And the role online spaces have played in removing some of that camouflage, as a matter of fact, is not getting enough credit. And I'll tell you why right now. That's my next point. Accessibility. Access is not a lifestyle preference. Okay, I'm a guy who spent over 12 years of my life as an adolescent in pre-internet India. I've been the guy who was asked to apply for 4 visas just to make it to one single professional event, a first international tour at a festival. 4 visas. I was asked to apply for 4 visas just to get there. The entire band had to change its itinerary to actually make sure the tour happened. I've cancelled work repeatedly due to bureaucratic delays in my past life. And before changing nationality, I'm German now, which gives me a lot of power as far as my passport is concerned. But before that was a reality, red tape was what often decided which opportunities I could or could not accept, regardless of preparation, qualifications, or even invitation. For many global creatives and students, education still involves visa systems that can stretch for months, currency disparities that quietly multiply costs way beyond the imagination of the regular dude, in the West anyway, postal systems that miss deadlines. I happen to personally know of someone who literally could not send in her application to a really reputed college, Berklee College of Music, despite getting a scholarship. She literally couldn't send the application in because it was all paper at the time. Then there's flights that cost more than the entire freaking course does sometimes. And last, but definitely not the least, safety concerns. Safety concerns which are never evenly distributed or even addressed. These are not edge cases. They're not the exceptions that a lot of the mainstream narrative seems to portray them as. They're actually, for a lot of people, they're daily realities. And online education didn't just offer solutions to these problems, it actually also exposed them in a subtle way that made many of us a lot more uncomfortable than we might be willing to admit. There's more though. You think in-person education is the real deal, you think online education is whack. Think about this. Think about the unspoken dynamics of physical spaces. Another part of the conversation that is rarely named, how power moves through, and get this, how power moves through bodies. Physical presence is not neutral. Size, volume, gender, confidence, heck, even skin tone, let's face it, social conditioning, all shape the manner in which we occupy space, or sometimes withdraw from them. I've been in rooms where a 6'6" presence did most of the talking without really saying very much at all. I've also witnessed way less romantic realities. People disengaged but still quote-unquote visible by default. People falling asleep mid-session, in the middle of a paid session. I've seen teachers who've literally fallen asleep while teaching. Hygiene being an unspoken distraction. Do you have any idea what it's like to last like a 45-minute lesson with smelly socks in the room, or someone with questionable showering habits? I have. Yeah, I just said that. Then there's daily commutes, sometimes, which can be from 5 to 4 hours in cities like London, that can totally hollow out attention before the learning even began. Now, to be clear, none of these invalidate in-person education per se. But what I'm saying is, it does complicate the nostalgia around it. This whole nostalgia around in-person events, and especially education, is so much more complex than we're giving it credit for. Every learning environment comes with strengths and weaknesses, and physical rooms are not exempt from that tenet. Here's another thing about online education people don't talk about enough. Online education can be harder to bluff. I mean, we keep talking about all the fake gurus out there online, but there's also an aspect where faking it can actually be tougher online. That might sound so counterintuitive, that's my German syntax creeping again. This is a part which is often overlooked, not my German syntax, but the online education being harder to bluff. Listen, I've been in online webinars where it was cringingly clear within a few minutes that I'd signed up for what was basically a marketing campaign with very little substance to offer anyone under the name of a workshop. But you know what? All I had to do was click on a button and stop wasting my time or energy. That was it. That's all. And what that exposed to me was how online learning environments make it a lot more difficult to hide fluff behind charisma or proximity. Participants can actually disengage quickly and painlessly when something doesn't land, or worse still, feel unsafe. People can't rely on atmosphere alone. Substance has to carry the virtual room. Cocktails and snacks won't cover up a cover-up. Yeah, that's a thing too. For a lot of professional events, maybe not traditional educational rooms, but education is a very broad term. I'm looking at the way from where I come from. But that ease of exit in the online format, it doesn't get enough credit. Okay, sure, it can also exacerbate commitment issues. I get that, and that is very legitimate. But the way I see it, immersion thus becomes a choice rather than a logistical enforcement. So, isn't that kind of freaking awesome? Language, the words that are being thrown around, why it matters. There's a language problem distorting this whole discussion as well. Yeah, and something I'm getting increasingly passionate about. Hear me out. What's often framed as online versus in person is, in my opinion, a lot more about location and time sovereignty. The whole shift we're looking at has lesser to do with whether we are on a screen during the work itself, but that, and listen to me carefully, has lesser to do with us being on a screen and more to do with the fact that our educational needs no longer get to be dictated by where we live or how we structure our time. And that, my friends, is huge. Why aren't people focusing more on that? That distinction matters a great deal, especially to me personally, which is why I'm incredibly careful. There's that word again, incredibly. Anyway, I really am very careful to make sure I don't get described as an online persona per se. And I insist on specifying this. I'm an artist, an educator, a coach, a facilitator, and more importantly, I am location independent. I work the way I do because I collaborate across continents, literally. I work 7 time zones with people whose lives, practices, and constraints don't allow for the friction of doing everything as it was traditionally done, quote unquote, traditionally. Now, that doesn't negate physical presence per se, and that's the whole collapse, which I am a little irked by. I play concerts, I do in-person workshops, I facilitate group meetings, I've been part of retreats, I've co-produced festivals, I've been artist in countless festivals, a lot of spaces and activities that offer something no digital space can. I would never really try to perform a concert online, for example. That never worked for me. A lot of my colleagues really tried that out during the beginning of the pandemic. I think I did one live performance on Instagram for my label at the time, who were based in California. We tried it out. I was pretty privy to the fact from the very beginning that, no, not happening. But none of this cancels the value of location and time independence to my coaching or consulting or teaching, or even studio projects, recording projects, much of which had been remote even before the pandemic. And even, and here's the kicker, even amidst artists often living in the same city. So many other producers and colleagues I work with in Berlin, you think we're always hanging out in studios together? More often than not, we're just recording at home and sending each other files. Outsourcing parts of the process online, quote unquote, expands what's possible. And collapsing that distinction into a debate about quality misses the entire point. So, final thoughts on online education and if it's dead. The way I see it, the way I see it, I'm messing around, okay. Seriously though, the way I see it, what tends to be presented as a rejection of a format of late is actually a reality that is closer to a very different problem. Any guesses? Trauma. Trauma is a bigger problem playing into the minds, into our minds, onto our lens on this whole debate. Online education entered most of our lives under conditions that surrounded what was essentially one of the most urgent cases of unprecedented global emergency in history. Conditions that were neither chosen nor designed for such circumstances, let alone learning. It became the place where everything happened at once, often including distorted versions of activities that didn't necessarily even belong there. Obligation, fear, the collapse of rhythm, desperate attempts to connect in ways that simply didn't even fit. The entirety of a global coping mechanism felt its complete weight being pushed onto one single medium. And the residue of that mammoth event has still not been processed completely. So, as humanity's knee-jerk reaction is designed to do, it directed so much of its pent-up frustration at the medium itself. Where does that leave those of us who'd been working location independently the whole time anyway? Glad you asked. In my opinion, it leaves us at a point where leveling up quality will be crucial. And in my world, that's good news. Now, everybody in this era will have to be way more selective. Educators will have to articulate what they actually offer more clearly and, more importantly, live up to them. We also need to choose our people more mindfully as well. Students and clients will be less willing to tolerate incoherence, performed charisma without substance, containers that don't hold what they promised. Walking away has become so much easier and staying more deliberate. So my conclusion here is that online education was never actually meant to mirror physical classrooms in the first place. Its deepest purpose was to transcend those physical classrooms. It probably sounds a little dramatic, but feel into that. Its emergence challenged long-standing assumptions around access, cost, safety, mobility, and legitimacy that had gone largely unquestioned for the longest time. Online education was a medium that brought the promise, or brings the promise, of freeing up two of the most valuable resources humans have: time and space. And what we choose to do with that will, as always, decide the crux of the matter. Hope that helps.
Hey folks, I hope you found that episode helpful. Here's a little request. If you did, consider sharing this episode with your folks. Think about the ways in which they might benefit the way you did. And please don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have queries. My name's TL. I'm an independent musician and educator and the founder of the Holistic Musician Academy.